Poured to the cloud. And there we are. So feelings are signals, but are you reading them correctly? This is the topic for today, right? And it's an understanding that I've carried with me for, I don't know, 10 years by now, I think. And it really has shifted a lot for me. So I'm getting better. I am not an expert at reading the signals, but I'm getting better at it. And that thing in and of itself is part of me doing gentle with an edge towards myself. It is letting myself feel every feeling that I'm feeling, because I am feeling every feeling that I'm feeling, but at the same time, not taking them as truth writ in stone, in the sense that I couldn't be feeling something else, because I could be feeling something else. So that's kind of my take on this, in and of itself. And I've divided the book Doing Gentle with an Edge into these 9 salons. And there were 5 chapters for today. And I know that Luke has read this. That's what I know. But I wonder, more than what you have already shared, what is your relationship with feelings as signals? Is this something that, yeah, I know that, I've always known that? Or is it something that you're still kind of working on?
For me, I think it's a lot of work to pick apart what are the different sources of feelings, because sometimes they are signals of my kind of inner desires or fears or whatever. Sometimes they are signals of I've not eaten enough, or I'm tired, or other things. So that they're always signals of something or of some bundle of things, but picking apart what those are is hard, and the thing I've kind of, I guess, got gradually better at over time, but still struggle with.
I think I would say the same thing. Feelings are like weather, and I've needed to move more toward radar and less toward reaction.
Thinking about feelings in my life, I can observe that as a child, the feelings were like the whole universe. If I was angry or happy or whatever, it's just that was my child mind perceived that as the truth of the whole world, right? And then as I grew to be a teenager or so, then this, a little bit more of a distance, but then that was accompanied with value judgments like, oh, you shouldn't be feeling that way, that's not cool, or and so that added another layer of complication. And then I guess, the adult journey is part of this class, is always trying to figure out, where does that feeling come from? Why? What does it mean? But at the same time, I also want to appreciate it for what it is, and, experience and enjoy life too, right? Not just analyze it. But I think there is wisdom, and, like Dan was saying, it may just be that it, I didn't sleep, or I'm feeling this way because of X, Y, and Z that just happened, or, and yeah. So, and like the Buddhists say, try to make friends with all your visitors, right? All the emotions that come through. So.
think that a big challenge that I've had is I kind of stopped the flow of emotions for a period of years, and so I for a while was working on just getting back in touch with, like, can we hear the signals? Can, and I'm getting better at interpreting them, but having it be like Beverly said, like weather, where the clouds are slowly passing, and it's not like, oh, we're just gonna have a monsoon now, and it's just a whole bunch all at once, and then okay, we're just gonna have like a drought for you know a long time, and then oh, okay, it's so that's not being in a on off kind of situation, and uh, getting more minute by minute signals versus, okay, we're going to batch process things. So
Mm.
I think sometimes for me, there's too many signals and it's easier to ignore all of them. Or on the flip side, if there's too many, you don't always trust that they're meaningful, and or you don't have the right language to describe them. And so you might take words from other people or things that you've read, and then something feels wrong about it, attempting to name it and things like that. I think there's, long story short, I sometimes have a disorganized relationship with how I respond to the signals themselves.
I think that's a good way to describe it. Is it tends to be something that it is disorganized. The analogy of my feelings are like the weather is an old one for me as well, and I appreciated it immediately when I first heard it many years ago, and it allowed me to look at it as a signal set. And it took a while for me to understand that the nature of the truth of my feelings is that I'm having an experience, and it's a physiological experience, and it may have bearing on the task at hand. So sorting out how to use them, the interpretation is sometimes I can do it in real time. Actually, a lot of the times I can do it in real time. But there are also times when they are stacked a little bit too much, or I've got a couple things going on all at the same time that need some sorting out, and it takes a while. And that's a normal part for me, of basic processing of this stuff. And then there's some feelings that come along where they're signals, and they have no verbal. I don't have a verbal need to interact with them in that way. I interact with them instead experientially, or I'm thinking of things like being at the top of a roller coaster, and this combination of feelings are happening all at once as I'm going down, or I'm walking into a presentation where things have not gone well going into that presentation. So working that stuff. So I think that's where the other thing I like about the weather is the weather analogy is that it allows me to add some meteorological flavor to my internal exposition. It's awfully stormy over here at the moment, or it's a little humid, or it's a little placid, or I like mornings like this, or whatever. So it's a broad topic, and I think that there's as usual, and trying to sort out just feeling, just letting it happen, just letting it be, And if I've got something I've got to get done today, maybe that feeling's involved in decision making, maybe it's not. And I think that's a really important piece for me is, am I interpreting this in a useful way? And do I need to make a decision around it?
I think something you just said, Frank, resonates for me in that sometimes feelings come with a value judgment. And I remember that being difficult when I was growing up because you often don't have a control over what you feel in response to something. And being told, you shouldn't feel like that is really hard because you don't know how to you don't know how to navigate that.
Right. And it's also one of those things where I've taken to the mindset and the philosophy that, my feelings are a lot like the colors of my eyes, or, my height. It's here. I have the feeling. There's not much I can do about it. And so, the judgment is tricky. And having somebody interpret for me is also tricky because there's intention there. And I have a tendency to wall up pretty quickly where I sense those intentions aren't virtuous in some way, or they're not supportive of me anyway. And that's what comes to mind when you in what you just mentioned, Beverly, was, in situations where I'm told I shouldn't be having those feelings. Oh my gosh, that's not a good space.
Yeah, that's one of the things that I really did not like with my ex-husband. He would say, "Oh, you're so angry." And I would get angry, even if I may have been sad or frustrated or anxious or anything. But just him pinning that on me would piss the heck out of me. And then I would get angry. And I would say, "I'm not angry," which of course kind of defeats the purpose. But I have a recent experience with a lot of feelings because that ex-husband died. He passed away a month ago, and we had a funeral on Friday, and it was really, really beautiful, and it was extremely hard. And at the same time, kind of like a catharsis, because I allowed myself to feel everything that I felt. I allowed myself to cry. With every hug I got, I could release a little bit more of the sorrow and the pain and all of the feelings that I'm feeling because he died. So for me, as hard as that was and as emotionally drained that I've been since, and Mandel can vouch for it, I'm happy for it. I'm happy for the feelings. I'm happy for the tears because they are also a signal to me that he meant something to me. He has been an important figure in my life for 22 years, and now he's gone physically from this world. So if I had not felt, if I hadn't let myself feel, it's like that sends other signals, right? So there are a lot of signals around, and I think for me that's part of the thing about feelings, that when I get the sinking feeling, the pit of my stomach, and it just churns down and you feel, oh my God, there's a tendency in society, let's go there. right? Let's discover, what is this? What's there? Let's get all of that muck out into the open. Whereas my understanding, even though I don't live by this 100%, but my understanding is that feeling tells me this is not the road to go. If you go down this road, you're headed for trouble. No, this will not be a nice place to be. So it's a warning signal of sorts, warning me that I'm about to head off into the ditch, and it'll be dirty and muddy and cold and, creepy crawlers and whatever there. So that's a metaphor that for me is very helpful, that I can kind of sense into this feeling of what it is. At the same time, that I'm careful not to use this as an excuse not to go after stuff that might be hard or difficult or scary. So I need to be fine-tuned to myself in order to kind of be able to discern, is this one of the warning bells, or is this one of the come hither you, because there's something for you here that I think will be really good for you, but yes, it will cause, butterflies in your tummy. That's a discernment that, again, for me, is part of the signaling issue. How am I reading them? What's the meaning I'm putting onto the feelings that I'm having?
Yeah, that's a really neat skill to have, because, yeah, how do you know if you're just afraid because of a good reason or a bad reason, or, of a valid reason, or would you miss out if you give into that fear,
So one difficulty is that there are often like good or maybe bad, but there are often social reasons to not go to not go into a feeling at the time you're feeling it. I mean, I think Frank and Helena talked about when someone else might kind of reinterpret your own feeling for you, but there are also things like I think in the book you mentioned feeling amused at a funeral and it not being the right time to burst out laughing. So the question is like, how do I recognize that those feelings exist and that I have some reason to not express them, but also not kind of not abandon them, maybe reflect on them later, or have some way of interacting with those feelings, which while also kind of fitting in whatever social role I've chosen to play in terms of not just expressing everything immediately at the time.
Right. So to me, that's an important dimension of this, is what's my response to the feeling I'm having. And sometimes it's a decision, to go to this place or that place, or, do this job or that job, something, larger scale. But it's also, you're right, it's very much, what's my social moment, which brings up to me, how do I express them? What response will I have in them? So, I can go into this presentation that hasn't gone well, and and my emotions are turbulent, and there is fear there's anger because, I'm interpreting the situations, in a certain way. And so that's causing feelings. Then something happens, had nothing to do with me. And again, I interpret that in a different way, and I still have feelings. And so I'm riding a lot of feelings out. And yet I still have to show up. I still have to lead this, 25 person facilitation, and, it's game time. So I got to put my game face on and go out there and do what I got to do. I think that the decisions we make around that are really huge. They have a really big impact on my well-being over the long haul. If I walk into a situation where the way I interpret it is that I'm being taken advantage of, and that's my leading interpretation, then my response might not be working to my advantage. Whereas if I interpret the situation as, yeah, I might be taken advantage of, but I'm going to have a good time anyway. I'm going to have a different response, and I'll deal with the aspect of feeling like I'm being taken advantage of in a different way. I'll handle that one in a different time. It really brings up a lot of layers, and I guess I'm back to the disorganization piece, which I very much appreciated and resonated with hearing. Is that it's not. I feel like on any given moment I'm in my improvisational skills around my responses seem good enough, but I also have this impulse, maybe even a compulsion, to organize them and practice them, and try to move them, which just seems sort of, I can't decide on how to respond to it. So it's an interesting combination of ideas that are here, right? Feelings as signals, and and I keep coming back to the response piece, and what do I do with them? And I think I'm a little of this, a little of that about the whole thing. So I appreciate hearing more.
And go ahead.
Okay.
Beverly. Or Luke. Yeah, go ahead.
Something that is popping up for me that is a through line with what several people have expressed is the difficulty of, okay, so you're having a feeling, and maybe it's not appropriate to express it, or maybe I have responsibility to somebody else, and so I need to not express it, like Dan was saying. Like, what if you just remember a really funny joke at a funeral, and it's like, well, I this is not the space for that, and even though this is something that I'm having, this is not, by acting on this feeling, this could cause somebody else suffering. Or in Frank's situation of, I am having a response to this situation, but I recognize that I'm responsible for a 25-person team. So if I act on this impulse in a way that, causes harm to the team, or just, doesn't move people forward, or, could potentially threaten their employments. I'm not really sure what the situation is, but, so, okay. So, because we talked about, well, there's, you don't want to hear that your emotion is invalid, but you also don't necessarily have the ability to act on that. So that's a push-pull kind of, how do you decide what is right for the moment, and how do you move through that? I think that's
which is interesting. And I have a couple of things that come to my mind. Is one of them is my friend Charlotte, whom Beverly also knows. She is fantastic in the sense that whatever she is feeling, she puts on the table. So she's in my mastermind class, and she's a dear friend of mine. And we're sitting in the mastermind, and all of a sudden she'll say, "Oh, now I feel so embarrassed," or, oh no, I feel so small or sad or scared or anxious, or now I think that you won't like me, or whatever it is. And just the act of actually naming it kind of diffuses it. So I wonder if the world wouldn't look quite different if more of us just did that. And she's very matter-of-factly about it. She's not doing it so that we would go gushing and kind of, try to make it better or anything. It's just a matter-of-factly putting it on the table, like we said, real, acknowledging it's here. And that's fine. And that's all. And then we can, and then she can kind of let it go because she has acknowledged it. So that's one of the things that comes to mind for me, which is also, there's a fantastic book by Arnold Mindell called The Deep Democracy of Open Forums, I think, which is fantastic. And he speaks about the importance of letting all of the underlying streams of energy, emotion, ideas, thoughts, whatever it is that's in a room, say of those 25 people, the importance of actually acknowledging all of them. So that's kind of the same thing, but can be in a completely different setting. But the other thing is the response piece. So in one of the chapters, I speak about, or I write about, how we are prone to put the label of good or bad, positive or negative on certain feelings. And my thoughts around this is that it's not the feeling, it is the response. It is the possible reaction that we fear. So when we say hate is a bad feeling, jealousy is a bad feeling, it is because we're afraid of what people might do out of that response, out of that feeling. If I'm feeling hatred, chances are I might react in ways that are not so good. And then we say love is a great feeling. Well, there's a lot of people that do shitty stuff based in love, right? That stems from their feeling of love. So it is the response piece for me is kind of the crux of the matter. Let us feel our feelings, because we do feel our feelings, unless we've put a lid on them, and then it's a good thing to let that lid off. Otherwise it's going to blow, right? Sooner or later it's going to blow. But to learn to be discerning, to learn that skill of here's a handful of possible reaction when I'm feeling X or Y. Which one works right now? It's intuition, it's my experience, it's, do we have plenty of time? Well, maybe then you can put it on the table, even if you're doing a presentation for 25 people. Or, okay, no, we have 11.5 minutes and we have another 3 things to get through. Maybe it's not the time, right? So there are so many factors about what is the right way of acting in any given moment. But knowing my feelings and acknowledging them, I think, is helpful for me in picking and choosing and being discerning in what's the response that will, that seems to be the one that's the one. And then now and again, I bomb totally and I pick the wrong one, right? Yeah, because I'm human, as are we all.
As I've listened, especially starting with Dan, we have the capability, though it's not easy, to choose the landscape for the weather and to choose a landscape that welcomes all of these different kinds of weather. I was privileged to attend the memorial service for an uncle of mine some months ago, where humor was actually welcomed. And that was such a fine celebration of the person he was, who very generous and funny and loving. And that, so humor had a place at that service. And it was so welcome rather than just this well of sorrow because he was missing. It brought to light another part of, yes, mourning him, but celebrating that moment. So, and I think that his family, his immediate family did a really good job of choosing that landscape for the emotions of the day. And I think there are ways to do that in that 25-person meeting too.
Yes, I think the example of like funerals or similar events is interesting because like we use it as a kind of example of don't laugh at a funeral, but actually when I think back to my father's funeral, I remember that there was a point where I felt like if we'd been on the kind of surface level of everyone being polite and distant, and then someone said something like, well, he was a very difficult man, wasn't he? And that kind of broke the ice, that everyone there had a kind of complex relationship with him, because anyone who's close has a complex relationship. And when we were trying to only talk about the positive things or the appropriate things, then that meant we weren't really being honest. When we could talk about the negative things as well, then we could actually all express our feelings more completely, including having more access to the positive things. Because I find if I'm trying to like only say positive things, then I'm putting up a mask. Whereas if I'm expressing the positive and the negative and everything else, then I have more access to what I'm really feeling, because there's not that kind of barrier, that like filter of what can I say and what can't I say.
And that's one of those things that I feel really fortunate to be able to do, is in those sessions open up with my own emotion, to be able to say, not necessarily I'm nervous or it didn't go so well walking in the door, but to bring an energy into the room of, yeah, and we're going to have a great day. It's not necessarily based in positivity, that hides or masks the difficulty, but it's at the moment in that specific situation where I am facilitating 25 people who are brand new at their jobs and now they're responsible for really heavy duty stuff, and I'm a guest, right? I'm not working with them daily. To be able to put them at ease, lighten the mood, because they got some hard feelings going on in that room right now, and to get a laugh, to try to get them to go, and to lead with my own vulnerability there, to open with, I'm having I don't even remember what I said, but I got him to laugh a few times. But that was the challenge, to acknowledge the situation while also evoking a lightness into this situation that helped everybody. Sorry, Marshall, I want to hear.
Well, it ties in nicely. I really like the idea of creating the landscape, and I guess the word responsibility feels a little heavy in this context, but as we're talking about how we want to have spaces to share our feelings or navigate them in ways that are perhaps incongruent with whatever the norms are around, the way we as the people who are receiving those things create a landscape or space for others to get them to us. And so like the funeral thing, even if it's, incredibly sorrowful and someone's laughing, I think in that particular moment, it can feel jarring. You want to judge. So I'm just thinking about the responsibility that I like and want to take to where someone expresses a feeling in a very incongruous way, but by receiving it in a different way than maybe we've grown, or repeating the norm, that these things kind of evolve and improve, like we're kind of carrying a torch in some way. And the ties to what you just said, in the sense that sometimes being vulnerable yourself, saying something outside of the norm, taking that step is actually creating the landscape in itself. You're not just doing yourself a favor, of course, but other folks.
Amir or Mandel? Amir, you have been nodding. I'm curious.
Yeah, no, I was just thinking about it in the perspective of giving yourself permission to experience the feelings, and knowing that, you know, feelings are, there are things that happen to you. It doesn't necessarily need to lead to any kind of particular reaction from you. And I don't know whether I heard it from a podcast or which podcast I heard it from, but at least it's something that personally resonated with me, because a lot of times, you know, we tend to suppress our emotions, tend to suppress our feelings, in a sense, not to kind of lose ourselves too much within a moment, or given, um, for example, if you're feeling angry at someone, you know, kind of try to suppress that emotion and not express that anger, whereas that anger may be, there's a valid reason for you feeling that emotion, and I think it behooves you to kind of look at it and understand what's triggering that emotion, and then find ways to address it directly with that person. So feelings can be real cues as well. Or if you're feeling a certain level of anxiety, how do you deal with that? Relationships with other people, when someone does or says something, how does it affect you? And a lot of it kind of ties into what stories we tell ourselves in terms of how we interpret situations. And those stories sometimes are our own machinations. It may not be reflective of the story the other person is telling themselves. So there can be a disconnect. And so the emotion you're feeling may not be truly reflective of the situation at hand, but in a sense, that feeling is telling you something, and it's your opportunity to kind of explore why that's happening. And to me, it's kind of like a trigger to get to the bottom of something, or to the truth of whatever the situation is.
I found the part few of you have been sharing about funerals rather interesting, because I've always felt that, well, I've always been to funerals where things have been said, and I'm thinking to myself, well, I don't know how true that is. And I was having a convo with a friend recently, and we both, I guess you can say, identify as Christian group in church. And we were saying how it would be someone that never went to church, never expressed believing in God or anything, and someone would get up and say, oh, I can't wait to see them in heaven, as if they or even believe that there is a heaven. Like they kind of just thrust that on them because they feel it's the right thing to say. And we were just sharing how we always felt that was funny. And at the same time, Helena, you said earlier that sometimes you have feelings and it's probably not a good idea to go down that path. And so you might have a feeling of, you want to say something at a funeral that might not be appropriate, or it might lead to other inappropriate behavior. And so you hold back on those feelings. But I do enjoy a funeral where there can be some humor, and you know, you can enjoy yourselves, but I also enjoy when the truth is being expressed at the same time.
And I wonder if that's not part of the conundrum of this stuff, that it's so, feelings can be used as an excuse. right? You can kind of cloak yourself in the feeling and then be excused. You know, your action, your response, your way of being can be excused because, oh, she's so bereaved, or she's so sad, or she's so depressed, or she's so whatever it is that one is feeling, which I don't think it's an excuse. It might be an explanation, but that's different from it being an excuse. And kind of the opposite of that is, like Luca was saying, when I shut myself down, when I don't allow myself to feel my feelings, when I'm not in touch with them, oh, the harm I can do to myself when I do that, because that can have me stepping into situations where I should not be, where I will be abused or you know, belittled or whatever it is, right? Because I've shut that part down. So again, the awareness of the ability to feel my feelings and to know my feelings and acknowledge my feelings and stand for my feelings without using them as a battering ram, excusing bad behavior, but also not shutting them down because, boy, it's so hard to work with them or to live with them. So I'd better just shut them down, because then you're basically doing the battering ram thing on yourself. Or at least there's a greater chance for it, I think.
I can think about times when, you know, I know why I'm feeling a certain way, but it can be terribly inconvenient. Like I had a job interview, and afterwards I was like, I need to go. I need to go back to home. I need to go to safety. And you know, the job interview went relatively well, but just because of the adrenaline in my system, that was sending a signal that is, you know, you're not safe. You know, there's a lion behind you that, you know, is gonna attack you. So you need to get to safety. And it's like, well, even in the moment I could recognize the signal, but it was like it's so powerful that I gotta go home. I gotta get to safety. And so you know, I think that it's a good point with the battering ram, that it's kind of like, well, you can fear and those kinds of responses are informative and are very useful signals. And if you cut them off, I mean, okay, yeah, sometimes you're going to be in a situation like this where they're not useful, but there are still many places in modern society where, you know, you have a bad gut feeling of, oh, I need to get out of here. Oh, you know, this is not a situation that I should be in. Or like the Simpsons meme, I'm in danger. It's like, but if you cut your emotions off, you don't know. So yeah, it's inconvenient sometimes when it's like, oh, okay, I can see that this is happening, you know, in a situation where, you know, I should not be feeling this. But there are many other situations where it's necessary and it is helpful.
And for me, I mean, it is the rational me that talks me out of what my intuition is giving me as a signal through a feeling, because that's part of the script, right? It's like feelings are a way for the system that is me to send signals to me. And then my rational me steps in and says just that, oh, you shouldn't, or, you know, this is too good of an opportunity to pass down, or whatever. Even if internally you're going, oh my God, no, this is not the right step for me. But, you know, oh, it'll be such a good promotion, or whatever it is, right? And you do it. And then inevitably, I end up falling flat on my face, realizing that, oh yeah, you know, 2020 vision of hindsight steps in, and you go, yeah, I knew Part of me knew. I just did not interpret the signals, or I chose to ignore them.
Has anyone had success manipulating their own emotions? For example, if you're in a situation, let's say you're doing something new, and there's a level of anxiety in terms of accomplishing something new, and then you kind of trick yourself into thinking, I'm not really anxious, I'm excited. So you're kind of flipping it on its head that, yeah, you're doing something new, there should be a level of anxiety, but then you kind of reinterpret it. It's not anxiety, you're more excited about doing something new, and kind of approach it from a different perspective.
Mhm.
Oh
I
yeah.
do that. Frank does that. Anne does that. Anne, go
Yeah.
ahead.
Yeah, I was thinking about how just if you have the time to reframe something, and I mean, I guess it doesn't have to take a long time, but like that's a good example where you're scared and then you can say, well, there's also this other way to look at it that's good, or I think that works with like rumination if you're getting depressed about something, and then you can really stop and say, is that the only way to look at it? I mean, is there a way to look at it that's neutral, at least if I can't bring myself to spin it positive, but just sometimes just the fact that there's some other way, any other way to to frame it kind of releases me from that dread feeling of like, oh, this is terrible, but not necessarily. Yeah, and I think the more we practice these kind of things, like our thoughts on a chemical level are, these reactions going through our brain, and as we do more of a certain type of thinking or behavior, we build stronger roads within our brain, and we return to those things over and over again. So with the plastic brain, they say, if we practice something that makes us happier, then hopefully when the rubber meets the road, when you have those split second things, when you just have to think and act, you start to make more pleasing choices. So.
Acknowledge, ask, act. So if you can't get around those negative feelings by refusing to acknowledge them. So you say, okay, something feels really bad right now. And you ask, what is it? And when you get the answer, then you can figure out how to act.
Yeah, I have a couple of examples of doing variations on both of those things, and I collect reframings that are effective for me, and I organize them a lot the way when I'm doing that awareness piece and asking what this is, I can start organizing those reframings. So an example for me is that when I first started my career, I was given the assignment of interacting with engineers. I'm the architect, and I'm supposed to call these engineers and issue, directions on what they should be doing with the job. And I would ruminate going into that call. Now, the time elapsed between the moment I got the assignment and the time that I pick up the phone could have been minutes, but thoughts work at light speed, so they could, that built up a lot of energy very quickly around all the standard questions that I mean, I'd never done it before. I had no idea how it was going to turn out. I did not know whether I was any good at it. And at the end of those couple of minutes, there wasn't anything, and there was nothing else that was going to happen other than I was going to pick up the phone, because that was the days when you pick up the phone and just hit the numbers, and someone would pick up. And the only reframe I had to, the reframe I had to hold on to was, while the number was ringing, don't hang up, don't hang up, don't hang up, don't hang up. It was that simple in those early moments when it was a particularly intense thing. But picking the phone up, the reframing there was, this is going to work or this is not going to work. And that's not my framing. That somebody else handed that to me. I picked that up from somebody who had this very pragmatic way of looking at these interactions. And it was like, you know, you're coming up to a stoplight and the stoplight's going to be red or it's going to be green, and you will act appropriately, you know, and that's what we're talking about. And but nonetheless, you shall march towards that traffic light. So in that phone call, what was leading up to it was, I'll know what to say, it'll turn out great, or it'll be hilarious, or it'll be a disaster. It'll be any one of those three things.
And you
So I'd make the
won't die
call.
from any of them.
I'm not going to die from anyone, and you know, I'm going to recover from all of it. But
Yeah.
man, the rumination was powerful. And then what happens emotionally is within 5 minutes, I get the assignment. I have these 2 minutes of like, what the hell? I make the call, hang in there. It's like ramping up to the top of the roller coaster. I get over the top, and this engineer on the other side of the call picks up the phone, and we have a great 10-minute exchange. And everything's, you know, they understand, or they have an understanding. We have an agreement to check in later or whatever, and it's over. And now my emotions are completely different. How I feel is completely different. And so I don't know if it was necessarily a manipulation, but it was a reframe. It was a it was a tool set of things that said, I'll know what to do, or I won't. I'll survive, or I won't. It'll be a good story, or it won't. You know, but I'm going to go through this. You know, that's at its heart, and it's worked very well. The other one is, for me, is deadlines. I have a habit of getting up against deadlines, and the shame gets released, and I'm not done, and I'm not making it, and I'll go radio silent. And so the way to get myself out of that is to make the call to whoever I have the deadline with as soon as possible. As soon as I can, I get on the phone with them and say, this is where I stand. This is what I think I'll be able to deliver or not. Make some adjustment, some acknowledgement. Doesn't matter one way or the other. But what happens to me is that all that pressure gets released. I've declared it. I've done a lot of what was discussed in this meeting, and the pressure is gone. So can you think of a situation where it's you're looking for a way to get out from underneath a set of strong feelings?
So Frank, when you were talking about the phone calls, one thing I was thinking was how temporary emotions are. So this is kind of coming back partly to the point about framing, that you can think, I am anxious now, but I'm going to be anxious until I begin doing whatever it is. Once I'm doing it, then I'm going to have a whole different set of emotions, which I can't really predict, but they aren't going to be the emotions I'm having now. So you can feel the anxiety or whatever it is, but also recognize that it is what's happening now, and in 5 minutes' time it'll be totally different.
That's brilliant.
Yeah, that's a really good take on it. I had a friend of mine who needed to start to do some cold calling, and he was like, Frank is like, I don't want to do this. So he actually started to, he made an Excel sheet, and he logged it. He logged, how uncomfortable am I before the call? You know, and it would be a 10 out of 10. It's like, disaster is going to strike, right? And then he logged after the call, what am I feeling now? And he was validating, did the thing that I was feeling, did it come through? You know, did it happen? Did the world explode and you know, shit hit the fan and stuff? And it never did. So he did that for a couple of days or weeks. And then he realized that my calibration is totally off. It's like I can just ignore whatever it is that I'm feeling, because he just realized that I have those feelings and they have never come true. So all of a sudden it's easier for him to just be with it. That does not mean he doesn't feel any of it though. So it is, like you're saying, it is this way of being in motion, of flowing with things, that I think is really, really helpful. And it points to one of the things of one of the chapters for this call, which is the problem is not the problem. The problem is always your thinking about the problem. So if you're anxious about something, it isn't the thing that you're anxious about. You're anxious about what meaning you put on it. It's like, if I make this, then if I don't make this, people will think I'm a really bad person. So I have to make it because that's the only way that they will see that I have value, etc., etc. So that for me is another of those ways that I use. And like Anne say, the more you practice this, the more I have learned to observe myself and just be with what is, without using it as an excuse, because now I'm feeling anxious and hence I don't have to make the call. No, I'm feeling anxious. Okay, I'm going to make the call. I make the call and it's fine. Now, all of a sudden, something shifts inside and it's not a problem anymore, because you learn how to do it. And you realize you don't die from it. So we're fantastic creatures. We have this intellect, this cognitive ability that just trips us up over and over and over again. So I think to a large extent, it is dropping down into the body, letting ourselves pick up on the signals and learning our signals so that we can be better at discerning of, what does this mean? What's the right course of action for hence, forward?
If I could, this is, I think, related, but I'm just noticing a similarity between what Amir and Frank were talking about. Amir, you brought up like a situation where two parties are not necessarily in communication and there's misinterpretation of signals. But there's this kind of thing of like, oh, well, neither party wants to engage because they're perceiving that the other party is hostile, and so the actual information is not being, there's assumptions being made and stories being constructed that maybe are not necessarily accurate. And I think that's also kind of similar to, Frank, what you were saying about like, oh, I can't I have to do radio silence until I'm able to deliver the project, because they're not going to want to hear about how I'm not, how I'm behind the deadline or whatever, and making an assumption that, or a story that, um, maybe what Helena you said was maybe more closer to the point, but something to that thing of, they're going to be angry, but they won't be angry if I do this, but I'm not going to check with them first to see whether or not this is the parameters. So I don't, and then to what you just said, maybe sometimes in this type of miscommunication situation, then communication is the answer versus well, this sounds more head than body, being in the head about trying to figure it out rather than from a cognitive perspective versus a experiential perspective. But I don't really have a point there, I guess. But I just noticed there's a similarity between those situations, and it felt relevant.
And I mean, assumptions are the mother of all fuck ups is one of my mantras. That is just, it's just so true. And the only way the only way for me to be with that and to try to diffuse whatever the situation is to, one, see that I'm making an assumption. You know, I need to become aware that I'm assuming something here. And once I'm doing that, I need to do what Beverly was saying. It's like acknowledge, ask, act. I have to see, I have to acknowledge that here's an assumption I'm holding. Ask myself, what is that assumption? Why is it there? What is it that I'm actually wanting or needing? And then speak up. You know, hey, when you said, I thought, was that what you meant? You know, ask a control question, if nothing else, and you'll get rid of a whole heck of a lot of assumptions that will cause fuck ups, because they do. At least the ones that you notice, right?
And especially with anxiety, I find that if I'm trying to avoid anxiety, then I stop myself even ask myself, what am I anxious about? And once I actually go into that emotion, then I realize either I'm anxious about this particular thing and I can find some way of dealing with that, or I realize I'm just anxious out of habit. There's not even anything I'm actually afraid of, and I could and I can move on. But if I'm just trying to not feel anxious, then I don't follow that feeling back to its root, and so I never get past it.
I think anxiety is a tricky one in general, and I've noticed that it can be a really, it has to be one that is acknowledged, and I personally, I mean, I'm finding that like meditation is a good way, but to deal with it, but it is tricky because the more you fixate on it and the more you feed into it, the more likely you are to actually manifest the things you're anxious about. As I, I mean, from personal experience, but also from, a friend where it's like, oh, I'm very anxious about this outcome, and so I need to like, ask all these people about whether or not, they're involved in making this outcome happen. So then, you know, the people then communicate, and it's like, oh, hey, that's kind of a good idea. So like, that's one particular situation of it, and I'm not explaining the full situation because there's a lot of context, but that kind of thing where it's like, oh, the more that you fixate on it, the less I think you become aware of, or the less you are able to see outside of yourself, and the more you're tunneled into this, like, I can just see this um, potential future, and like I am missing the broader picture.
Right. And then it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy at times, and then you kick yourself afterwards for doing that to yourself. But yeah.
Yeah, I think it was actually a documentary I watched recently, and the filmmaker was going through an anxious period, and he had invited a monk over and trying to work through some of the anxiety, and one of the things that this monk said really really resonated with me. And he said, number one, are you anxious, or are you fearful? Are you afraid? And if it's anxiety, then you have to understand that anxiety is natural. You're always going to be anxious. If you think about it, when we come into this world, we are born with anxiety. You come from a safe place within the womb, and all of a sudden you're pushed out of this narrow restriction into a completely new environment, and you're kind of forced, and imagine the amount of anxiety you have to go through to kind of get there. But birth still happens. You still come into the world. You still take your breath. There are things in your life that just work out. You know, when you eat, you digest your food. You don't have to think about breathing. And with some of those things, you just have to trust life to take care of itself. Like you just have to have faith in life, and that, you know, some things are just going to work out. And even though you have that background of anxiety, you just got to have trust in the world that things are going to work out one way or another.
Which is great, because one of the chapters for today, the story for me, or the understanding that I've gotten about the difference, or rather the similarity between the physiological immune system that we have, that if I cut my finger, you know, I don't have to do anything for it to heal up, because it heals up if I am in a good state. You know, if I'm not malnourished or whatever, that's a different thing, right? But that the psychological immune system works the same way. So if I do cut myself, yes, of course, if I cut myself and it's bleeding, I'll rinse it off and I'll put some Band-Aid on it. But then I don't scratch it, because if I'm there constantly scratching at it, it won't heal. And anxiety or fear or whatever are the same thing. You know, if I'm there constantly scratching at it, it won't be able to heal. And our immune system, the psychological and the physiological, is always constantly working to bring us back to our innate well-being. And it is there. That is why the kid doesn't have to, we don't have to worry about taking a breath, because we breathe. I don't have to work the digestive system, because the digestive system works. No, it's there. And the immune system analogy for me has also been really helpful, which kind of links to the fact that what you, Luke, was speaking about in UN, how what we focus on, we get more of. So if I focus on the anxiety and I'm there scratching the wound constantly, yeah, well, welcome more anxiety, because it's gonna come. You know, that's the table I'm setting for myself. So being aware is such a huge part of all of this. If I'm not aware of what I'm feeling, if I'm not aware, if I'm not feeling, I don't have anything to work with.
And I like that analogy of, you know, don't scratching the scab, because it to me, it made me think of, like, when something unpleasant happens, or something happens that I end up with unpleasant feelings. Like, sometimes my tendency is to be like, oh my God, what happened? Why'd that go wrong? Let me analyze it. Let me figure that out and keep going. But then another option is just to be like, do something else, you know, just let it naturally in the back of my mind heal, you know, and come to a better understanding about it later, or you know, self-soothe and soothe in some way to just, yeah, it's like we don't have to be constantly trying to make these involuntary processes to, you know, don't try to take them under your voluntary control. You're like breathing or digesting, because you can't. For one, you couldn't spend all your time thinking about those things, and you wouldn't do it well anyway. if I had to think about every single breath.
There's a point where introspection becomes treadmilling.
Yeah, precisely. It's this fact of of letting things be. And I think there's also, again, we are living in a society where cognition is lauded so much, even though, like Lick was saying, Wim Hof, there's a lot of body awareness that is coming to the table nowadays. So if I have trauma, I might need to deal with it, but I might not have to deal with it cognitively. I might not have to figure it out, know what to do, how to act. Maybe I need to shake. Maybe my body needs to be immersed in cold water and realize that I can survive this too. Whatever it is, there's so many ways to come through. That doesn't have to be words, even though I am a great lover of words and I really, really do enjoy them. And I realize they can be a trap, or they are a trap, where I think that I have to have an explanation for everything. No, I don't. So that's part of the puzzle as well, right?
Yeah, I think that's critical. I think that the beauty to me of the weather analogy is that I can't control the weather, and a lot of what used to get said in sort of the informal peer therapy arrangements in 12-step rooms had to do with setting the frame in that way. The feelings come and the feelings go, and they have a life of their own sometimes. And it's not that I'm powerless over my emotions, because you get to that later, but it's don't try to control that they've come. And when they do come, yeah, set them up with the TV remote for a while, or just don't let them drive, as is said. But then the other thing is that there are times when what I've done is I've set a storm into motion that's going to come get me later. And I'm doing, so it's not necessarily that I have control of the weather, and it falls down a little bit because I do have some power. And that's really important to acknowledge, that but the signal to me is that I put myself in a situation that results in me being angry, or I put myself in a situation that results in me having pleasurable, relaxing moment. I put myself in a situation where, yeah, I've got to go interview for those jobs, and that adrenaline is running. And oh, hey, look at this. Somebody just educated me that when I have adrenaline, the way to deal with adrenaline is shake it off. Literally shake it off. There's a physiological component to adrenaline. It's a hormone. And if you want to process it out of your body, so what do? I go drum if I'm not dancing or I'm not singing. I mean, one or the other. But it's shake it off. Yeah, exactly. So that signaling is kind of long term. It's more like, mysterious intelligence that comes, and it doesn't surrender to intellectual and cognitive processing very easily. It's it really yields to experimental stuff. And so act.
Yeah. I was just reading Taylor Swift was right.
I didn't mean to make light of it, because it is very true, but the joke was too good.
It was too good. It's too good. It was just right.
So we have 4 minutes to go, and as always, we could spend another hour or 2 or 3 or 5 or 10 on this, but we won't. So I'm curious to hear what you take away from this session. If there's anything new, anything that you think, oh, I'm going to try this one on.
I was all getting prepared for a word. It's fine.
You can do a word too. I usually do words in my Patreon Zoom calls. You can do a word.
I liked
I'm-
the metaphor of emotions as weather and the reactions to that. That was oddly new to me. I'd not come across that in the past. So thank you. I think it was Beverly who brought it up first. So thanks for that.
I'm going to take away the dwelling piece. You know, not dwelling on things too much.
And I think just that realization that at any moment, yeah, I could feel something different, like you said right at the beginning, you know.
The reframing for me, and the idea of maybe don't get, well, I guess this is partially dwelling, but when you have something hard to go up against, maybe think more about what is going to happen afterwards, and not what you are feeling right now, and hyperfixate on that. And reframe it as this works or this is not going to work, but you're not going to find it. You have to find out. Otherwise, you don't know.
Yep.
Yeah, I think the weather analogy and also about framing the situation. I think it was Beverly that gave the example of the funeral with her uncle and the way they curated that experience for the rest of the people. I think that was pretty powerful.
I wrote down a few things: acknowledge, act. Also, the example of documenting before and after is a way to kind of connect the fear to the reality. I had to write down these assumptions are the mother of all fuck ups because it just resonates.
It's a given, right?
It's a given. Probably get that plastered on the wall. Amir's is it anxiety or fear? So wrote down. And then my last one was, I think it was Beverly's, the weather is, there's a landscape in which weather takes place. Found that in her book as well.
The thought of being able to build landscapes is something that is kind of bouncing around for me. I work with pretty large groups, but they are people in training who really need to be able to recognize and acknowledge what they're feeling before they can help the people they're interacting with. So that the idea of building landscape that is open to whatever weather comes is really intriguing. It's not easy.
I'm taking with me, don't scratch the wound.
I think for me, what I'm taking with me is the reminder to do gentle with myself when I'm feeling what I'm feeling. I'm processing quite a lot of my own stuff on a deep level at the moment, and I have done for 2.5 years in therapy, but a lot of new type of shoulding myself comes up. So reminding myself to stay in the body, you know, to acknowledge, ask, and act. is really what I'm taking with me. So thank you all so very much for this. Frank dropped out. I really appreciate you all coming here. There's I think next session is on play, possibly. There's a session on the 2nd of June, and I would love to see you all there. Or one of the other ones, because there's still quite a few left in this long series. You look ready to come. He's been saying he's going to come to plenty of these. He hasn't so far, and I've been saving my big guns for the play topic. If you don't know already, my podcast, the Tankespjärn podcast, season 1, season 2, I don't remember even what season 2, Reddy speaks about play a lot, and he's the play master of the universe, I think. So that'll be a fun session. So thank you all for coming. It means a whole lot to me. I want you to know that. So thank you for today.
Thank you, Helena.
Y'all have a
Thank
good
you, Helena.
My mouse isn't working.
Your mouse isn't working. I will soon shut it down. I just need to save the file for the message, or for the whatever it is. Save chat. There we go. Bye, Beverly.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you.